November the 1st, 1700. The Escorial is all stone and silence, a monastery palace built like a sermon. Candles spit and waver. The air smells like wax and old prayers. And on a bed draped in tired velvet lies Charles II of Spain. Charles the Bewitched, 39 years old and already a ruin, eyes bulging, skin translucent, that unmistakable Habsburg jaw thrust forward like a curse you can measure in bone. He struggles to close his mouth. A servant props it, with silk, like he is shoring up a collapsing arch. A bowl of broth trembles in a stewardess' hands. Latin murmurs float like smoke from the lips of physicians who have long since run out of remedies. Midnight tolls. The last breath sounds like a bubble breaking in a drowned man's throat. The candles hiccup. An empire that once stretched from Peruvian silver to Philippine galleons goes airless. One body fails. Half the map shivers. Here is your hook, listener, a dynasty that devoured the world with weddings, undone by its own bloodline. How does a stone keep in Switzerland become a colossus? How does a family turn velvet vows into borders and later into shackles? One vow at a time, one cradle at a time, one jaw at a time. Rewind. Autumn light, thin as old gold, lies over northern Switzerland around the year 1025. The Ahr River glints like a blade. Borders are rumors. What is solid is rock. And what holds rock is will. Radbot, Count of Klettgau, part administrator, part bruiser, all calculation, stands on a crag that claws the sky and makes a decision. Not with a council, not with a trumpet, with the tightness in the gut that tells the founder it is time. Oxen groan uphill, hammers scrape, stone meets mortar with the dull heartbeat of effort. Castle hauls itself upward, a squat hawk of granite gripping the cliff. Habsburg. Call it Hawk's Perch or Fort Escape. Name it Berg. Make the stone your surname. Fix your line to a place like a nail hammered through time. Listen closely. The next 2 centuries are not fireworks. They are a slow braid. The early Habsburgs do not joust for applause. They kneel for signatures. They choose the chapel of the tourney. They master the oldest trick in Europe, acquiring land with rings, not ransom. A sister's marriage nets a valley. A nephew's betrothal wins pass. A widow's hand brings mills and meadows without a single lance lowered. Other lords die in hedgerows over hedgerows. The Habsburgs build ledgers. They favor the spider's craft over the falcon's dive. Patient, sticky, effective. By 1200, their holdings feel like links in a chain. The Rhine's breath in the west, the Danube's whisper in the east. No one writes songs about paperwork, but history keeps the receipts. The house that began as a stone silhouette in Swiss mist is now a network. It is not glamorous, it is deliberate, and that is the point. Now the moment a camera lingers, the interregnum, no emperor, just a throne like an empty stage from 1250. In 1273, electors of the Holy Roman Empire, 7 prince kingmakers, think of them as shareholders with swords, pick Rudolf von Habsburg, not the brightest sword in the rack, the sharpest pencil in the drawer. He accepts with a nod that sounds like a hinge creaking in a long hallway. 3 years later, the hinge slams. 1278, Marchfeld, Flatland, dust and hooves. Rudolf faces Ottokar, the second of Bohemia, a king who had snatched Austria, Samosvaria, like a magpie stealing shiny things. The sky turns to iron. 20,000 men crash together. By nightfall, Ottokar's skull is a cautionary tale. Rudolf pries Austria and Styria from Bohemia's fingers and installs his sons as dukes. Just like that, the center of gravity shifts. The Habsburgs acquire a real heartland, Vienna, and the long valley of the Danube. 1 battle, 2 duchies, a new axis. Vienna is not much yet. 10,000 souls, wood and thatch, mud and markets. but it breathes deeper now. In 1365, Rudolf IV plants a university there, the second oldest in the German-speaking world, like a flag in the province of the mind. Trade routes begin to kink and reroute. Grain from the Pannonian plain, salt from Alpine teeth, cloth from Bohemian looms. All of it starts flowing toward Vienna-Eschern. Cityhood is momentum. The Habsburgs give it a push and never stop pushing. Not everything follows the script. In 1315, at Morgarten, Swiss peasants in wool and willpower ambush armored Habsburg knights and kick them into a lake. Halberds and local knowledge beat lace and arrogance. The Swiss core slips from the family's grasp. It stings. It also teaches a lesson. The Habsburgs will heave for centuries. Keep your eyes east. The land beyond the Alps is flatter, richer, and less convinced that yodeling confers invincibility. Now we come to the first of the truly consequential marriages, the kind that rewrites maps without spilling a drop of blood. Maximilian I, Habsburg prince in need of a windfall. Mary of Burgundy, a duchess whose father, Charles the Bold, died outside Nancy in 1477 with a Swiss pike somewhere it should not be. He left her the mother lode, the Low Countries, today's Belgium and Luxembourg, plus slices of France and the Netherlands, Hanseatine lusty provinces where tangs hum and money breeds. On the 19th of August, 1477, in Ghent's incense-thick air, they tie the knot. Hold that thought. The Burgundian inheritance is not just acreage, it is leverage. These lands pulse with trade. Bruges and Antwerp are Europe's beating commercial heart. Think cloth, think ships, think letters of exchange, fluttering like visas to the future. Marry Mary, and the Habsburgs stop being a regional Swiss-Austrian family and start being the kind of family bankers notice. The dowry is not a ring, it is a set of keys. It unlocks a future that includes ports, markets, and the first whispers of a world economy. Max did not just gain a wife, he acquired a financial engine. One vow, a gilded web, a dynasty upgraded. From that pivot, Europe begins to tilt around the Habsburgs, but the real tectonic shift comes with an even bigger marriage. Double-barreled alliance that binds the Habsburgs to Spain, just as Spain is about to become a supernova.